My wife and I had argued plenty of times before, but that night it escalated over something so trivial that it almost feels embarrassing to think about now. I had forgotten to put the toilet seat down, and she started yelling as if it were the final straw. Her voice was sharp and piercing, and at some point I realized I simply couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. I called my friend Eric, and he told me I could stay over at his place for the night. That was all I needed. I was exhausted and didn't want to deal with anything until morning. Eric's house was large, so large that it had always been a point of frustration for my wife. She often complained that all of my friends lived in nicer houses than we did. That night, the irony wasn't lost on me. We had a couple of beers and talked for a while. He offered to let me stay as long as I needed, but I assured him it would only be for one night. I didn't want to be a burden. I slept in one of his guest bedrooms. There were 3 of them in total, which always struck me as odd. Eric only ever used one, while the other 2 stayed locked. He said he kept personal belongings in them, and only planned to use those rooms for special occasions. All 3 guest bedrooms were lined up next to each other, while Eric's own bedroom was across the hall. The layout was unusual, and because of it, I soon began to hear strange noises coming from the room next to mine. At first, I assumed Eric was moving around, but the noise didn't stop. It was quiet, yet persistent, like someone carefully rummaging through something. After a while, it became irritating enough that I decided to investigate. I tried the doorknob of the neighboring room, but it was locked. I then cracked open Eric's door and asked him if he heard anything. He was already in bed and said he hadn't noticed a sound. When I asked why those doors were always locked, he repeated that he stored personal items in them. I warned him that something strange was coming from the room, but he told me to go back to bed and come get him again if it continued. So I did. When I returned to my room, the noises had stopped. About half an hour passed, and I was just starting to drift off when I heard a faint tapping on the wall. It was coming from the room on the other side. Then I heard a voice. It was quiet and barely audible, but it was enough to jolt me upright. I ran back to Eric's room, and this time he took me seriously. He grabbed the keys and unlocked the door to the room next to mine. As soon as we stepped inside, a cold draft hit us. The window was wide open, and so was the closet. We searched the entire room. The bed had indentations, as if someone had been sleeping there. Inside the closet were empty bags, and the valuable items Eric kept in the drawers were gone. Suddenly, Eric ran out into the hallway. At first, I didn't understand why, but I quickly followed as he moved to the last locked door. I was right beside him when he unlocked the 3rd guest bedroom. The first thing we saw was a black figure climbing out the window onto the patio roof. Eric was about to jump after him, but instead, we both ran outside through the back door, hoping to catch him. By the time we got there, he was already gone. And honestly, that might have been for the best, because what we found in that room was far more disturbing. The white sheets on the bed were stained with blood. On the floor of the closet lay a butcher knife Eric had been missing, speckled with blood. And, of course, all of his valuable belongings were gone. Most likely these people, probably homeless and possibly dangerous drug users, had been living inside his house for more than a week. Eric had even mentioned earlier how quickly his food kept disappearing, despite the fact that he barely ate. Now it all made sense. As far as we know, none of them were ever caught. This happened when I was 15 years old. My best friend Mike invited me to stay over for the night. His parents were leaving town for the entire weekend, and the house was completely ours. I rode my bike to his place, left it in the backyard, and went inside through the back door, like we always did. The evening went exactly the way nights like that usually go. Non-stop video games, everything from sports games to shooters, bowls of popcorn, soda, and trash scattered all over the floor. Eventually, we got bored. We put on a movie, watched about half of it, and lost interest pretty quickly. It was close to 10 in the evening when Mike suggested we start making prank calls. He called a few pizza places first, pretending to place stupid orders. Then the phone was handed to me. I just started dialing random numbers, hoping someone would pick up. On about the fourth attempt, someone finally answered. The voice was male, low and rough. Instead of saying hello, he simply said, "Yeah?" Mike was laughing behind me, which made me stumble over my words and break into laughter myself. I had never done prank calls before, and it showed. The man on the other end of the line went silent. I forced myself to calm down and tried to continue, doing my best to sound serious. Sir, would it be okay if I borrowed one of the wheels from your car?" "What's your name, kid?" he asked. Tom." "Really?" There was a short pause. "You sure your name isn't Mike?" My stomach dropped instantly. I looked over at Mike, and his face had gone pale. He looked genuinely terrified. I hung up the phone immediately. I didn't want to be on the line with whoever that was for even another second. "Who the hell was that?" I asked. I don't know," Mike said. "Maybe we have caller ID on?" We checked. The display showed his father's name. We sat down at the computer and started searching, trying to figure out if it was possible to get someone's name that quickly through a phone number. Nothing made sense. Mike was far too young to have his information listed anywhere. We even posted a question on an online forum, but no one had any explanation. I suggested calling his dad, but Mike refused. His parents didn't know anyone was staying over that weekend, so we decided to just sleep in the living room and finish the movie. That's when we heard the front storm door open. A second later, the handle of the main front door began to turn. It only twisted halfway before the lock stopped it. Mike immediately turned off the TV. I went over to the window and slowly lifted the blinds. A tall man was standing on the porch. He noticed the movement and turned his head toward me. I dropped the blinds instantly, and we hid in the kitchen. A moment later, we heard the backyard gate open. "Damn it," I whispered. "I forgot to lock the back door." Mike urged me to run and shut it. I made it to the hallway and froze. A silhouette stood outside the back door. He was looking into the house. The door opened, and the man stepped inside. I quietly backed into the kitchen and motioned for Mike to follow me upstairs. We ran into his bedroom and shut the door as carefully as possible. Then we crawled under his bed. The bottom of the bed was covered with fabric, so you couldn't see underneath unless you lifted it. We heard doors opening downstairs. Footsteps moved closer, then the stairs. The bedroom door opened. I could hear Mike breathing. It was too loud. I had to cover his mouth with my hand. The man opened the closet, sliding hangers back and forth. Then he walked over to the bed and stopped. The room went completely silent. We stayed there so long that I almost convinced myself he had left. I slowly moved my hand away from Mike's mouth and whispered if we could make a run for it. He was about to answer. That's when the most disturbing scream I have ever heard filled the room. Mike was violently pulled out from under the bed. I crawled out after him and saw him struggling with the man. I desperately looked around for anything I could use as a weapon and grabbed a screwdriver from the nightstand. I rushed forward and drove it into the man's back. He screamed in pain and let go of Mike. We ran out of the house and into the woods behind it. Running into the street would have given away our position, and the neighbor's house was too far. We hid behind a bush and watched as the man stepped outside, scanning the backyard before turning his gaze toward the woods. We thought he couldn't see us. We were wrong. He started walking straight toward us. We ran. The leaves crunched loudly under our feet. Mike tripped, and we fell to the ground. Less than 20 seconds later, footsteps approached from behind, stopping only a few trees away. Then they suddenly moved off in another direction. We waited until everything was quiet and ran back to the house, locking the door behind us. This time, we called the police. While Mike stayed on the phone with them, I patrolled the backyard windows. It was too dark to see anything, so I made a decision that seemed stupid at the time. I turned on the backyard lights. At the edge of the woods, I saw him standing by a large tree. Then he turned and disappeared back into the darkness. That was the last time either of us ever saw him. 5 years have passed, and nothing else has happened. Sometimes I wonder if it had anything to do with that prank call. Probably not. But Mike and I are still best friends, and we both know that night came very close to killing us.